name is Cassandra Vale, 28 years old. The crystal chandeliers in the Fairmont Hotel's grand ballroom cast prismatic rainbows across polished marble, the light catching on champagne flutes like tiny golden explosions. 200 guests swirled through the space, women in silk gowns brushing shoulders with men in tailored tuxedos, the air saturated with the heady perfume of orchids flown in from Thailand that morning. A string quartet played near the grand staircase, their bows moving in perfect unison as though every note had been rehearsed for decades. It was my brother David's engagement party, a spectacle that cost more than most people's annual salaries. The kind of event you'd expect for a visiting royal, not the celebration of a corporate lawyer marrying into old money. I stood near the service entrance in a simple black dress, the same one I'd worn to job interviews 3 years ago, carefully pressed and paired with modest flats from a discount shoe store. In this room full of diamonds and custom couture, I blended into the wallpaper, invisible. And, if I was being honest, that invisibility was intentional. From across the room, I heard my mother's voice float above the hum of conversation, crisp and clear. "Darling, everything looks absolutely perfect." She was air-kissing Victoria's mother, both of them radiant in gowns that cost more than my rent for the year. Mom wore her newest Valentino, the one she had bought just for tonight, and her 3-carat diamond earrings winked with every animated gesture. "We're so thrilled to welcome Victoria into our family," she continued, the pride in her tone as thick as the perfume in the air. Dad stood beside them in a tuxedo tailored so precisely it might as well have been stitched onto him. "Only the finest for our boy," he boomed to a group of his business associates lifting a glass toward the bar. "Nothing's too good for David's special day. He's always been our star." That word, star, landed in me like a familiar bruise. I'd heard it at David's graduation, at his promotion party, at the rooftop gathering for his penthouse move-in. Never once had it been aimed at me. David stood in the center of the ballroom, arm draped possessively around Victoria's waist, the two of them basking in the collective adoration of the crowd. His Tom Ford tux probably cost more than my rent for 3 months. Victoria's engagement ring, a 5-carat emerald-cut diamond, caught the chandelier light like a captured star. Their conversation floated across the room. Wedding at Martha's Vineyard. Guests flown in from around the globe, a feature in town and country. I drifted along the wall, occasionally intercepting an overburdened waiter to help refill champagne flutes or collect empty plates. Not because it was my job, but because keeping my hands busy was easier than answering questions about my life. Questions that inevitably led to polite nods, sidelong glances, and quiet judgment. "Sweetheart, grab us some of those canapes," Mom called from across the room, pointing toward the trays like I was a member of the waitstaff. "The ones with the caviar. Victoria's parents will love them." I nodded without argument. It was easier to comply than to make a scene. As I navigated between clusters of guests discussing stock portfolios and ski vacations, not a single person met my eyes. A woman in a beaded gown stopped me mid-step. "Could you direct me to the ladies' room?" she asked. I didn't correct her assumption that I was staff, letting her think that was simpler than explaining who I was and how little that title meant here. From somewhere in the crowd, an aunt's voice rose, warm with admiration, for David, of course. He's always been exceptional. Harvard MBA, partnership at 29, and now this beautiful engagement. We're so proud. The unspoken comparison was as sharp as glass. And then there's Cassandra. I forced a neutral smile as I continued toward the catering station, but inside, something taut and electric coiled tighter. They had no idea. No one in this room did. Not yet. David was in his element, moving from group to group like a politician on the campaign trail. He laughed easily, clapped shoulders, and told stories with the kind of polished charm that came from years of practice. Wherever he went, the conversation orbited around him, his recent court victory, his upcoming wedding, his perfect life. Victoria, always perfectly composed, floated beside him like an expensive accessory. She flashed her ring at friends from her sorority, who gasped on cue. "David spared no expense," she gushed. "We booked the entire resort for the weekend, flying in guests from around the world. The magazine spread is going to be breathtaking." I sipped from a water glass, my back against the far wall. It was a survival tactic at these gatherings. Stay put, look occupied, minimize the chances of being pulled into a conversation about what you've been up to. From here, I could observe without being observed. Their world revolved on a different axis, one of inherited connections and seamless networking. To them, I was a curiosity at best, a cautionary tale at worst. A cluster of Dad's colleagues passed by, their voices low but carrying. "Shame about the sister," one murmured. "Pretty girl. Just never did much." My jaw tightened. I'd learned to let comments like that wash over me, but tonight each one seemed to catch and stick, like burrs clinging to fabric. I caught sight of my parents standing with Victoria's mother again. Mom's smile was effortless, the kind she wore when aligning herself with people whose approval mattered. Dad was already halfway into another monologue about David's meteoric career. If I didn't know better, I'd think I was watching a sales pitch. At the edges of the room, waiters in crisp white jackets moved in synchronized patterns, replacing empty champagne flutes and restocking canapes. I fell into step with one of them, helping to clear a cluster of abandoned plates. The waiter glanced at me, surprised. "You don't have to—" "I know," I said quietly. "Old habit." He gave me a small nod of understanding before disappearing into the kitchen. Somewhere inside, a part of me wanted to laugh at the absurdity of it all, this glittering cage my family called life. Every interaction was a performance, every smile a carefully measured currency. And me? I'd been left out of the script entirely, except when they needed a prop to set off David's shine. What they didn't realize was that I had my own script, one they'd never bothered to read. And if fate kept its current course, they wouldn't just read it tonight, they'd be in it. I didn't know exactly when the turning point would come, but I could feel it gathering momentum, like the slow, unstoppable pull of an incoming tide. Around 10 o'clock, the sound of a champagne flute being tapped with a silver spoon cut through the hum of conversation. David stood in the center of the ballroom, his arm around Victoria, both glowing under the chandelier's light. The string quartet's final note faded into silence. "If I could have everyone's attention," he called out, his voice smooth and commanding. Heads turned, conversations halted, and a hush settled over the marble floor. I stayed where I was, near the service station, still holding an empty tray from helping one of the servers. Years of family events had taught me that staying in the shadows was safer, but David's eyes were already sweeping the crowd. "First," he said, flashing his best practice smile, "Victoria and I want to thank you for being here tonight. Your presence means the world to us as we celebrate this next chapter in our lives together." Polite applause rippled through the crowd. I could almost feel the collective warmth flowing toward him, the same warmth I'd spent my life watching from the outside. "And David continued, I want to introduce Victoria's parents to some of our family members they haven't met yet." He paused, scanning the crowd again. His gaze landed on me, and the corners of his mouth curved upward in a smile I knew too well. Not the kind that welcomed, it was the kind that warned. "Victoria, Richard, Eleanor," he called, gesturing toward my corner of the room. "Come meet my sister Cassandra." I felt 100 pairs of eyes shift in my direction as they began making their way over. Every step they took felt like the slow closing of a stage curtain, trapping me in a scene I hadn't agreed to perform. Memories flickered unbidden. My 12th birthday, when David made a joke about my art phase that had the whole table laughing, the college graduation dinner, when he casually mentioned my gap year that had actually been spent caring for our dying grandmother. He always did it the same way. Just enough humor to make it seem harmless. Just enough audience to make it sting. Victoria approached first, her smile flawless, her dress a cascade of silk that caught the light like water. Her parents followed, Richard, with the easy charm of someone who had never needed to earn a room's respect, and Eleanor, with the kind of elegance that wasn't worn so much as inherited. For a brief second, I let myself imagine he'd keep it polite this time, that maybe, just maybe, he'd surprise me. But David never wasted an audience. "Meet the family failure," David announced with theatrical ease, his voice pitched just loud enough to carry to the nearby guests who had started gathering. It landed like a slap. A ripple of polite, restrained laughter moved through the circle, polite in tone, cruel in intent. "Cassandra's been exploring her options," he continued, the smirk deepening. "Still trying to figure out what she wants to be when she grows up." I stood perfectly still, tray balanced lightly in my hands, every muscle locked in place. Around us, people smiled and chuckled as though he'd just delivered a clever toast. They didn't see the precision in his words, the way each syllable was a blade honed by years of practice. "Oh, David," Victoria said with mock admonishment, swatting at his arm. "You're terrible. I'm sure Cassandra is wonderful." Her tone, warm on the surface, had the same hollow quality as a hostess complimenting a guest's off-the-rack dress while wearing couture. Richard's handshake, firm at first, softened noticeably. Eleanor's smile tightened by a fraction. They were recalculating. I could see it, adjusting their mental ledger of my worth. "Been living in that little apartment downtown," David added casually, "working temp jobs here and there. We keep telling her something more stable would be good. Maybe retail management, something with a steady paycheck." A second wave of laughter followed, quieter this time, the kind of laughter people use to mask discomfort while still playing along. I caught movement at the edge of my vision. Two guests discreetly lifting their phones, recording. "She's always been the artistic type." Mom's voice floated over from somewhere in the circle. "Very creative, very idealistic. We thought she'd outgrow it eventually, but, some people just like chasing dreams." Dad gave a solemn nod, as though this was a family challenge they'd been patiently enduring. "We've offered to help her get into something more traditional. David has connections, could get her a chance despite her unconventional background." The words pressed in like the air before a storm, heavy and electric. I could feel my heartbeat in my throat, not from embarrassment, though that was there, hot and sharp, but from the effort it took to stay silent. Because deep down I already knew, the longer I stayed quiet, the sweeter the turn would be. And something told me the turn was coming very, very soon. The circle around us had grown thicker, a cluster of expensive fabrics and polished shoes closing in like petals around the center of a poisonous bloom. From somewhere behind me, I heard the faint clink of silverware on porcelain, someone pretending to be distracted, but leaning in all the same. The performance was too good to miss. Victoria tilted her head, giving me the kind of smile you'd offer a distant cousin you met once at a wedding. "Some people are just late bloomers, I suppose," she said lightly. The phrase floated in the air, landing with the gentle weight of a velvet-wrapped brick. A few of her friends nodded sympathetically, their eyes already glazing over in polite disinterest. I recognized the look. They were mentally moving me into the not worth networking with category. "Cassandra's always been different," David added, his tone almost indulgent now, like a pet owner excusing a dog that chews the furniture. "Marches to the beat of her own drum, never quite understood the value of conventional success." A few low chuckles, the kind that carried more judgment than humor. And then, almost imperceptibly, the air shifted. Victoria's hand, which had been resting casually on David's arm, slipped away. She had her phone out, thumb flicking across the screen with a kind of restless curiosity. At first I thought she was scrolling to escape the awkwardness, but something in her posture changed, stiffened. Her gaze froze mid-swipe. Her lips parted slightly, but no words came out. The conversations around us continued in a low, expensive murmur, but I could see it, the beginning of a crack. The moment where the script she thought she was following no longer matched the lines on the page. And I knew the turn wasn't just coming. It was here. Victoria's phone screen glowed faintly against the soft lighting, casting a pale reflection onto her face. Her expression was unreadable for half a second, then it shifted into something sharper. She blinked once, twice. Her eyes flicked to me, back to the screen, then to me again, as if she needed to confirm I was made of the same flesh and bone as the image staring back at her. "Is this you?" she asked quietly, the words barely carrying over the ambient noise. The effect was instantaneous. The laughter, the murmurs, even the clinking glasses seemed to fade into an unnatural stillness. The string quartet's melody floated on, but it felt far away, like music bleeding through a closed door. David, mid-sentence with one of Victoria's friends, stopped, his brow furrowed. "What?" Victoria turned her phone toward him first, then toward the nearest guests. The glossy cover of Forbes filled the screen. A woman in a sleek charcoal suit standing before a wall of floor-to-ceiling windows, the city skyline blazing behind her. Headline in bold: "The Disruption Queen: How Cassandra Vail Built a $3.2 billion AI Empire in Secret." The silence wasn't just quiet, it was charged, a vacuum pulling every eye, every thought toward the glowing image in Victoria's hand. David's mouth opened, then closed again, like someone searching for the next line in a speech they hadn't prepared for. Richard and Eleanor leaned in, their practiced social poise slipping by degrees. Around us, guests craned their necks, curiosity sharpening into something hungrier. I looked at the image on the phone, at the headline that had been printed a week ago, but had lived in my reality for years. Yes, I said evenly, that's me. It was the first time all night I'd seen David genuinely speechless. And that, just that, was worth every second I'd waited for this moment. Victoria's voice, once a measured instrument of polite society, now wavered with disbelief as she read aloud. Founder and CEO of Quantum Solutions. Net worth estimated at $4.7 billion, named to Forbes' list of America's most innovative entrepreneurs. The words hung in the air like confetti that no one dared to touch. Someone near the back of the circle whispered, "Billion," and the syllables rolled through the group like a current. Guests shifted their weight, the soft rustle of silk and wool filling the stillness. David's eyes darted between the phone and me, his perfect composure cracking in fine, almost imperceptible lines. The smugness was gone, replaced by something more brittle, confusion, maybe even fear. Richard's expression had gone from faintly indulgent to pale calculation, his jaw working as though trying to chew an idea too big to swallow. Eleanor simply stared, the corners of her mouth no longer lifted, her gaze searching me for some sign that this was an elaborate hoax. I didn't move, didn't smile, didn't offer them the out of making this easier. Victoria scrolled further. Largest tech IPO in the sector's history. Proprietary AI algorithms. Licensed by multiple Fortune 500 companies. Currently expanding into medical diagnostics. Her voice strengthened with each sentence, as if reading my resume might help her believe it. The cameras on the edge of the circle, once raised to capture my humiliation, now focused in tight, greedy frames, documenting every twitch of David's jaw, every flicker in my parents' eyes. And in that moment, the ballroom's hierarchy inverted. Victoria's tone shifted from disbelief to something almost clinical as she kept reading. Quantum Solutions went public 6 months ago with the largest IPO in tech history. Martinez's, she caught herself, Veils, proprietary AI, has revolutionized financial trading, cybersecurity, medical diagnostics. She paused, scanning the next line. Projected valuation, over $6 billion. A murmur ran through the crowd, the kind that sounded like a collective recalibration of how to treat someone. Richard's hand, which had been resting casually in his pocket, dropped to his side, as if the weight of this new information demanded a more formal stance. My mother finally stepped forward, her voice hesitant. Cassandra, you live in that tiny apartment. You take the bus. I live simply by choice, I said evenly. The apartment is 2 blocks from my downtown office. Public transportation is more efficient than gridlock in a Bentley. I have never been interested in material displays. My father's brows furrowed, his pride colliding with something like embarrassment. Why didn't you tell us? I tried, I said. Every family dinner, every holiday, every phone call for the past 3 years. You told me I was wasting my time on computer nonsense. A ripple of discomfort spread through the nearest guests, people unused to watching polite facades fracture in public. Victoria kept scrolling, as if unable to stop herself. Multiple patents, keynote speaker at the Global Tech Summit, partnerships with 12 government agencies. I could feel eyes on me now, not as the family failure, but as something else entirely. Yet instead of satisfaction, there was only a quiet, steady calm. Because the truth wasn't new to me. It had just been invisible to everyone else, until now. I let the silence stretch just long enough for the weight of the moment to settle, then met my parents' eyes. You didn't want to understand, I said quietly. Understanding would have meant listening, and listening would have meant believing that I might actually be capable of something. My mother's lips pressed into a thin line. My father shifted uncomfortably, his gaze darting toward the cluster of onlookers. For people who thrived on controlling the family narrative, they suddenly looked like characters in a story they no longer recognized. Richard cleared his throat as though trying to steer the conversation back toward safer territory. Well, clearly you've done extraordinary things, but why keep it from them? I turned toward him, my voice steady, because every time I tried, it was dismissed before I finished a sentence. My worth was measured against David's milestones, and I was always found wanting. David's jaw tightened. That's not... It is, I cut in. And tonight? You introduce me exactly as you see me. Not as your sister. Not as someone with her own life. Just a convenient foil for your success. The murmurs in the circle grew louder, a tide of whispers crashing just out of earshot. Somewhere in the crowd, a phone camera's red light blinked steadily. Victoria spoke again, though her voice had softened. "This is going to be public by morning. It's already on social media." I looked around the circle, at faces that had been laughing minutes ago. Then maybe it's time the truth had a bigger audience. I set the empty champagne tray down on the nearest table, the small metallic clink loud in the stillness. "Congratulations on your engagement, David," I said, my tone calm, almost cordial. "Victoria, I hope you'll be very happy together." I turned toward the edge of the circle, but his voice caught me before I took 3 steps. "Wait, Cassandra, we need to handle this." I stopped, half turning. "There's nothing to handle. You introduced me exactly as you see me. That's not a PR problem. It's the truth, or at least your version of it." David's eyes darted to the guests still lingering close enough to hear every word. His smile had vanished entirely, replaced by something that looked a lot like panic. They'll think what they think," I said. "I can't control that, and I don't care to." Around us, the ballroom glittered on as if nothing had shifted. The chandeliers still scattered rainbows across the marble. The string quartet still played something light and forgettable. Glasses still chimed in celebration of a future that, for David, suddenly looked less certain. I walked away from the circle, the soft carpet muffling my steps. Behind me, whispers rose like the sound of an incoming tide, mingling with the faint click of cameras. It occurred to me then, this party wouldn't be remembered for David's toast, or for the imported orchids, or even for the ring. It would be remembered for the moment when the golden child story cracked wide open. And for once, I didn't mind being part of the headline. The cold night air hit me like a baptism the moment I stepped outside. The muffled swell of music from the ballroom trailed after me, before the heavy glass doors closed, sealing the celebration inside. I took a deep breath. For the first time all evening, the air felt clean. Pulling my phone from my clutch, I called my driver. The line rang twice before his calm, familiar voice answered. "On my way, Ms. Vale." I slipped the phone back into my bag and glanced at the line of luxury cars idling near the curb. Sleek machines, gleaming under the golden glow of the hotel's exterior lights. The irony wasn't lost on me. I could buy any one of them 100 times over, yet tonight I'd arrive the same way I always did, quietly, without spectacle. Inside, the party would be recovering, laughter stitched back together with false cheer, as if ignoring a crack could erase it. But the crack was permanent. My phone buzzed in my hand, my assistant. "CNBC wants to move your interview up to tomorrow morning," her text read. "They want to lead with the Forbes cover and market reaction. Should I confirm?" I typed back, "Confirm." "And schedule a meeting with legal tomorrow afternoon. There may be personal matters to address." The screen dimmed, leaving my own reflection staring back at me. Calm, composed, and, for the first time in years, completely unburdened by the need for anyone's approval. The drive home wound through the glittering arteries of the city, neon and street lamps flickering across the car's leather interior. I leaned back against the seat, watching office towers rise and fall in the windows like quiet sentinels. For the first time in years, my thoughts weren't racing with what I should have said, or what I should have done differently. Tonight had stripped that burden away. David's words, my parents' expressions, the guests' laughter, it all felt like the prelude to a symphony whose climax had finally arrived. The reveal wasn't something I'd planned, but in hindsight, it felt inevitable. Secrets only stay buried when no one bothers to dig. Tonight, someone had. The truth was out now, and not because I'd shoved it into the spotlight, but because they'd handed me the stage themselves. All it took was one glossy cover and a headline big enough to pierce the armor of their assumptions. Outside the tinted glass, the city stretched endlessly, windows glowing like constellations in a man-made galaxy. Millions of stories unfolding at once. Ambitions, failures, second chances. Mine was just one of them. But unlike a few hours ago, it was no longer invisible. Tomorrow would bring questions, interviews, and a media storm that would gnaw at every edge of my life. But as we turned toward my street, I realized something profound. The version of me they'd needed, the failure to prop up their star, was gone, and she wasn't coming back. My phone rang just as the car slowed in front of my building. David's name lit up the screen. I considered letting it go to voicemail, but curiosity won out. "Hello." "Cassandra." His voice was tight, frayed at the edges. "We need to talk, tonight." "That whole thing. It got out of hand. We can fix this. I let the silence sit for a beat. Are we family, David? I asked finally. Because for 3 years, I've been trying to figure out what that means to you. It means we stick together, he said quickly, desperation bleeding into his tone. We support each other. We work through problems instead of walking away. Where was that support, I asked, when I was working 16-hour days to build my company? When I tried to tell you about breakthrough patents and you laughed? When you introduced me to 200 people as the family failure? He exhaled sharply, the sound of someone cornered. I know we made mistakes, but this is different. People are talking. We can make it right. Some things can't be fixed, I said. And tonight wasn't a mistake, David. It was the inevitable result of 3 years of choices you all made. On the other end, I heard the faint murmur of voices, guests still lingering, no doubt dissecting every moment of my reveal. What happens now? He asked, and for the first time all night, there was genuine fear in his voice. To us? To the family? I looked up at the dark silhouette of my building, the penthouse hidden from street view. That depends, I said, on whether you're capable of change, or if tonight is just damage control. Give us a chance, David pleaded. A real one. Let us show you we can do better. I stepped out of the car, phone still pressed to my ear, the night air cool against my skin. I've been giving you chances for 3 years, I said. Tonight was your chance to see me, without filters, without the narrative you've built around me, and you still chose humiliation over respect. Silence on his end, the kind that isn't about thinking, but about knowing there's nothing left to say. Some damage is permanent, David, I added quietly, and you can't negotiate your way out of it. I ended the call and slipped the phone into my bag. The elevator whisked me to the top floor, opening into my penthouse, floor-to-ceiling windows framing the city like a living painting. Not the tiny apartment they imagined, but a home I'd bought outright because privacy was worth more than showmanship. My phone buzzed again, this time a message from my head of PR. Twitter is exploding. #engagement party. Reveal is trending. Stocks up 12% after hours. Do we issue a statement? I set the phone aside, walking to the glass and resting my palm against the cool pane. The city lights sprawled endlessly, each one a fragment of a story I'd never know. Tomorrow would bring headlines, interviews, speculation, but none of it could change the simple truth. The family failure label had never been about me. It had been about their need for a foil to David's shine, and now that role was dead. I stood there a moment longer, letting the quiet wrap around me. Then, for the first time in years, I smiled. Not the polite, measured kind, but the kind that comes when you finally stop caring who's watching.